Is it possible to responsibly self-certify with a little or very limited budget? This person is referring to a spectrum analyzer, a Rigol or Rigol DS A815 spectrum analyzer with a bilog antenna and an LISN. I'm sorry if I messed that up. What comes to mind when reading this question is referring to some EMC test equipment. Maybe then it's good to explain a little bit about what test equipment you need to do full compliance testing. Because having a spectrum analyzer and an antenna is not going to do the job for you, correct?
Yeah. The equipment that he's referring to would form part of what I would describe as a pre-compliance test setup.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the client actually goes on to describe he's actually wanting to ship a small volume of pre-full production parts, and he's wanting to attach a CE mark to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also wanting to generate a declaration of conformity saying that the product is in compliance,
mm-hmm.
or might be in compliance,
mm-hmm.
because he's not sure if he can do the immunity testing
mm-hmm.
successfully.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that this is an extremely risky approach to CE marking,
mm-hmm.
Particularly as you are actually allowed to supply prototype parts into the field
mm-hmm.
without a CE mark, without a declaration of conformity, but under some form of quality control.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you need to record your prototype model serial number, where it's being shipped to, and you need to be doing sort of weekly reports on how the product is actually performing, whether it's causing any interference,
mm-hmm.
and whether it's being interfered with. Making legal declarations, as in a declaration of conformity, attaching a CE mark indicating full compliance when you don't know if it is or isn't compliant,
mm-hmm.
is, to my mind, very risky.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you would concur with that, Han, or not.
Yes. Having a legal background.
Yes.
I would say by affixing a CE marking to a product and by drawing up, signing a declaration of conformity, you are, as a manufacturer, you're indicating that the product complies with all the requirements and that you have the evidence in your technical file. And so basically you are saying, it's maybe we take EMC as an example because that's maybe also the most complicated one. With EMC is invisible. So the only way to determine whether you comply is by testing, correct?
Yes.
There's no visual inspection that you can do. So you would need to do testing. And there is basically
Except for the ESD test.
Okay. Well, and there is basically the way that you test is in accordance with standards, correct?
Yes. That gives you what's called a presumption of compliance.
Yes. And also there will be no discussion because you are referring to another document. It's not just your invention that this product complies. You're referring to the standard, which is a consensus document, and everybody's referring to that. So you will apply the standard. But then, of course, the market surveillance authorities in the member states of the European Union, seeing the CE marking, reading your declaration of conformity, they are going to look in your technical file to see if you have sufficient evidence to support your claim of CE compliance. And they will want to take a look at test reports. In these test reports, they're going to expect list of equipment that was used for testing. And if this report is referring to just a spectrum analyzer and an antenna, but not the equipment that is required to do, for example, certain immunity tests, they are going to conclude that the test report is incomplete, and that the declaration of conformities, declaring compliance with a standard, is also incomplete, and therefore they're going to doubt the validity of the CE marking.
Yes.
So,
it is important to understand that the attachment of a CE mark and declaration of conformity associated with electrotechnical standards only gives you a presumption of conformity. In other words, the way that the standards are worded at the front, they tend to indicate that having passed all the tests that are within the standard does not necessarily mean that your product is actually going to behave properly under all situations in the actual field. One of the particular and interesting scenarios within the UK is that we have an extremely powerful radio transmitter based in the hills in the Pennines, between the east and west coast of England. And there is a road that goes alongside this. Now, this particularly powerful radio transmitter produces electromagnetic fields in excess of 100 volts per meter, which is the normal limit that's set for vehicles. So if you test the standards and attach your CE mark and drive your vehicle, which has been tested up to 100 volts per meter, past this antenna, there is actually a chance that your vehicle will actually stop.
Yeah.
So in other words, being able to attach a CE mark and having done full compliance testing doesn't necessarily mean that your product is going to behave 100% of the time, 100% of the situations, 100% of the environments that are available within the actual European Union. It just gives you a presumption of compliance. It gives you, I've done as much as I feel is due diligence.
Yes.
And you can rest on the actual sort of laurels, as it were, that you have performed the compliance testing. Whereas if you haven't done the compliance testing and your product misbehaves, then you are in real problems.
Yeah. So if we would have to give him tips about with a limited budget, what you can do there, I think during the interview we've mentioned already several things that would apply here, but I think it would be good to start with very good description of the intended purpose. So in which environments is this product intended to be used? Because that means that you can exclude certain circumstances, and maybe some parts of standards will not apply. So you're narrowing down the scope of the standards, and therefore maybe also the amount of tests that you have to perform.
Yep. I mean, one of the horrific thoughts about this question that's been asked, which I was thinking about earlier today, what if this product that this gentleman is speaking about is going to be used in an ATEX environment?
Do you mean, that's an interesting thought. Do you mean he knows it's intended to function in such an environment, or maybe the case that
Oh,
one of his clients takes his product and uses it in such an environment.
he hasn't said, we're working blindly on the scope of application for the product that he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, pre-compliance testing I would not recommend as a suitable solution for use within an ATEX environment. In fact, I would doubt very much if anybody that was sane would think about using a prototype
Mm-hmm.
within an ATEX environment.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like holding a gun to your head with all the barrels filled and playing Russian roulette.
Yeah. And then the another step that he can take is if there are several models to make a cluster specifically for the testing, a cluster of trying to determine what is the worst case configuration of this particular device, and
Yes.
then have that tested, because well, especially with EMC, it is the more electronics that are introduced, and the more complex the configuration is, the more EMC problems you can expect. Correct?
Correct. Yes.
And then if you remove components from that, you should only see improvements in your EMC measurements.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's always good to try to determine what is the most complex configuration and have that tested for pre-compliance and full compliance.
Yes. One of the good debug um, tests associated with EMC testing is to actually switch your device that you're testing off, then run the test.
Mm-hmm.
And if you still get the same results, it's got nothing to do with your device because it's off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yes.
It's like testing a brick.
Yes.
Yeah? You could attach a CE mark for electrotechnical to a brick quite
Mm-hmm.
happily,
Mm-hmm.
because one, it doesn't catch fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You're not likely to get an electric shock off it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely EMC compliant.
Yes.
Yes.
I think this answers the question that I received. I also received just now another question, and this relates to a very particular product, which I have to say it's always difficult for us to answer very specific or questions related to very specific products, because we don't know the product, we haven't seen a sample of it, we haven't seen documentation, so it's really difficult to say something sensible. But this is a question regarding a electrical muscle stimulation device, and the question is basically related to under which directive and which standards it would fall. So I can just say that electrical muscle stimulation device, the gentleman asks, is under LVD, which it potentially is. At the same time, it could be considered to be a medical device, and that brings it into a completely different category of requirements, with a lot more requirements, not only in terms of testing, but also in terms of production requirements, having the need for a quality management system and what have you. So the gentleman asked if this would be the product that could fall under the standard EN 60335, part 1, part 2, subpart 32. That's possible. We would need to see the device, and we would need to check the standard in order to be able to give a sensible answer there. But I think this question relates again to the importance of determining the intended purpose of your product before going into the directives, and before trying to find the standards that apply and that you are going to use for the actual compliance testing.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, as you say, there's there is the potential here for this device to be considered to be an electrical medical device from the point of view that it actually applies an electrical shock to the person using it, which I have a funny feeling would tend to make it fail as a normal electrical device.
Yeah.
Normal electrical devices do not tend to give you electric shocks. Therefore, to get it CE marked or to get it approved, it would tend to have to fall under a medical application from that perspective. Just as in, if you manufacture a radio device, like a cellular telephone, within the normal EMC path, you're not allowed to produce radio waves above a certain level. Obviously, that's impractical if you're making a radio communication device, because part of its intended purpose is to produce radio waves at a certain frequency, at a certain power level, and therefore it has to be approved as a radio rather than just an ordinary piece of electrical equipment.
Yeah. Hi, do you have questions about CE marking or the application of specific directives and standards? Head on over to our website at cemarking.net/voicemail. Leave your name, give a short description of the product that you have a question about, and we may answer your question during our Q&A Tuesday video. You can also send us an email at han@cemarking.net. That is HAN@cemarking.net.